Wyoming Territory, 1882. The wind off the plains carried dust, and the scent of scorched wood as August Monroe rode into the edge of a burned-out homestead, his horse stamping nervously beneath him. The place looked like it had been swallowed by fire a week ago. Black skeletons of fence posts, a crumbled barn, and in the middle of it all, a woman on her knees in the dirt, clutching a shovel like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She had dirt streaked across her cheek and forehead, her hair stuck to her neck with sweat. Her dress was torn near the hem, and under the fabric, her belly pushed forward. She was near full term. August dropped from his saddle without thinking. "You hurt?" he asked, stepping close. She looked up, eyes rimmed red but steady. "No, not yet anyway. You alone?" She nodded once. "My name's Norah Nolan. My husband died out by the river in spring. I buried him myself." August swallowed hard, looking past her at the shallow grave she was digging. "That another one, my brother. Nathaniel, shot 2 nights ago, tried to fight off the men who set the barn on fire." August knelt beside her. "You should not be out here by yourself. Not like this." Norah didn't answer. Her arms trembled as she tried to shovel again, but the handle slipped from her grasp. August caught it and set it aside gently. "I will finish this," he said quietly. "I do not need your help. You are shaking. I am still breathing." He paused, watching her try to stand. She made it halfway up before her knees buckled. August caught her before she hit the ground, one arm around her back, the other under her legs. She stiffened in his hold. "I do not want easy," he said then, voice low, steady. "I want you." Norah blinked. "What?" "I am not here to fix everything. Just to stand with you while you do." Her shoulders dropped just a little. "You do not even know me." "I do not need to. Not yet." He laid her down gently on the only patch of grass that had not turned to ash. Then he went back to digging. The sun beat down on his back, and the ground was dry and stubborn, but he worked until it was done. He laid Nathaniel Nolan to rest before nightfall. That night, Norah sat beside a fire August built from what little he could salvage from the edge of the woods. Her hands rested on her belly, fingers splayed wide. "Why are you really here?" she asked. August stared into the flames. "Looking for land, a place to start over. You picked a cursed one." "I do not believe in curses." She looked at his face then, really looked. He had a long scar down his left cheek, not fresh but deep. His eyes were the color of old glass, worn, clear and full of things he had seen and never spoken of. "You've been through something," she said. "So have you." They sat quiet for a while. In the morning, he helped her gather what little had survived the fire: 2 sacks of flour, a bundle of quilts, a cracked kettle. Then he patched the roof of the cabin where the flames had spared one corner. She moved slower now, more careful. By the 3rd day, she let him cook the beans and salted pork so she could rest on the porch. He never asked about the baby's father again. She never offered more than she wanted to. On the 5th morning, she woke to find him loading supplies onto his horse. "You leaving?" "I am riding into town for medicine and nails. I will be back before sundown." She hesitated. "You sure you are coming back?" He looked over his shoulder. "I would not leave you here, Norah." She nodded, but her jaw tensed as she turned away. August rode hard into Cheyenne and back, and when he returned, she was sitting on that same porch, arms crossed. "You were late. I brought you tea for your nerves, and oil for your skin, and a proper hammer." He tossed the hammer into her lap. She caught it with a surprised laugh, short and sharp, but real. "You trying to buy your way into my good graces?" "No, I am trying to be the man who shows up when he says he will." She held his gaze, then relaxed back into the chair. "You are strange. I have been called worse." That evening the wind picked up again, rustling the dry grass around the porch. Norah stood with her arms folded over her belly. You do not ask me what I am going to do when the baby comes. I figure you will tell me if you want to. I do not know yet. He stepped up beside her. Then we figure it out together. She turned to him slowly. Why? Because you are standing, he said, and I know what it costs to keep standing. Her throat worked like she was trying to swallow words that hurt to say. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. I had no one, August, not since Nathaniel died. I thought I would birth this child alone in a cabin with half a roof and no one to hear me scream. You will not be alone. Why? He reached out and brushed the dirt from her cheek, slow and careful. Because I do not want easy, he said again. I want you. She stared at him, lips parted, breath caught. Then she leaned into his touch, eyes closing just for a second. And for the first time since the fire, Norah Nolan let someone hold her without bracing to be dropped. The first snow came early. It started with a thin veil at dawn, just a hush of white along the cabin's stoop. By midday, it had thickened into a steady fall, quieting the prairie and silvering the burnt edges of the land. August hauled water from the creek before it froze over, his sleeves soaked and stiff by the time he returned. Norah stood at the hearth, wrapping dried sage in a strip of cloth and tying it off with twine. You plan to smoke the cabin out? He asked, stamping snow from his boots. No. It helps breathing during labor. She tucked the bundle into a small cloth pouch, then looked at him. And it keeps the bad spirits off. He didn't laugh. Then we'll burn it when the time comes. Norah sat slowly on a stool by the fire, her hands settling low on her stomach. You ever seen a birth? No. You afraid of blood? No. She studied him a moment longer, then reached for a basket by her feet. Inside were a few knitted socks, each one small enough to fit in his palm. Nathaniel's fiancée left these behind when she went back east. They never married, but she'd started making things. I kept them, even after she wrote saying she wasn't coming back. August crouched beside her, touching one of the socks with a kind of reverence. You want to keep them? I think so. A gust of wind rattled the window pane. The fire popped, sending sparks up the flue. August rose and added another log, then pulled out a folded oilcloth from his saddlebag. Inside were nails, a length of canvas, and 2 books. These were in the back of the general store, he said, laying them on the table. One's a ledger. Others stories. For the baby, maybe. Norah ran her fingers over the worn cover. You read much, when I can. My mother taught me before she passed. You've got her eyes then, Norah said, almost to herself. August said nothing. He sat down on the floor near the hearth, legs stretched out back against the wall. She watched him for a time. You sleep with one eye open, when I need to. Do you now? He didn't answer. But his gaze stayed on the flames like he was tracking something only he could see. That night, Norah's sleep broke just before sunrise. The pain came low and steady, like a rope tightening around her center and refusing to let go. She didn't cry out. She pressed her lips together and breathed through it, one hand braced against the wall as she eased herself upright. August was already on his feet. I'll bring the water, he said. She nodded, fingers digging into the edge of the table. By the time the second pain rolled through, he'd stoked the fire, set the kettle, and laid every clean cloth they had on the bed frame. Norah leaned against the wall, sweat already beading along her temples. I thought it would come slower. Then we work fast. They didn't speak much after that. The hours passed in firelight and snowlight, the storm outside thickening as the storm inside her body gathered speed. August stayed beside her, steady hands and quiet presence, never flinching when she gripped his arm hard enough to leave marks. At one point, in the deepest hour before dawn, she sagged against him, her voice hoarse. I can't. You can. I'm not strong enough. He held her upright. You're still standing. Her eyes were glazed, but she laughed once, breathless. You're stubborn. You're alive." And then she was bearing down, the room narrowing to fire and pain and the sound of her own breath breaking. August caught the child himself, wrapping it in one of the knitted blankets, his hands trembling only after it was done. "It's a girl," he said. Norah's head lolled back, tears slipping down her temples. "Is she?" "She's breathing." He placed the baby against her chest, the tiny body curling instinctively against her warmth. Norah looked down at the child, her expression soft in a way he hadn't seen before. "She's here," she whispered. August sat back on his heels, face pale, shirt soaked through. "You did it. We did." Snow still fell outside, but inside the world felt warmer somehow. August didn't move from the floor. Norah didn't ask him to. The baby made a small sound, just enough to fill the silence. Norah looked over at him. "What now, we build?" he said. She met his eyes. "You still want me?" I never stopped. And when she reached across the space between them, her hand found his without hesitation. The snow held through the rest of the week, muffling sound and softening the ruins still scattered across the land. Smoke curled from the chimney, and inside the cabin, warmth bloomed in layers fire, wool, skin, breath. August carried in a bucket of split logs and set them by the hearth. Norah was seated in the rocker by the window, the baby pressed against her shoulder, eyes closed as she hummed low under her breath. She stopped when she noticed him watching. "She quiets when I hum," she said, "even if it's off-key." August pulled off his coat and hung it on the peg. "She knows your voice." "I suppose she does," Norah said, brushing her thumb along the child's back. "She's got a strong grip, caught my braid earlier and wouldn't let go." "She's stubborn then." Norah's mouth twitched. "She's mine." August stepped closer, glancing down at the child. "We should give her a name." "I know." He waited. Norah didn't look up right away, just shifted the baby into the crook of her arm and studied her face, small and pink and impossibly still. "Clara," she said finally. "That was my mother's name." August nodded once. "Clara Monroe, then?" Norah's gaze lifted to his. "You sure about that?" "I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't." She looked at him a long moment, then back at Clara. "All right." Later that day, August stepped outside to check the fence line, boots crunching through the crusted snow. The wind had settled, but the cold was sharp. He moved slow along the posts, tightening what wire remained, marking where new lumber would be needed once spring thawed the ground. When he returned, Norah was kneading dough at the table, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Clara lay swaddled in a basket near the stove, eyes wide and dark. "You always bake when you're tired?" August asked, brushing snow from his collar. "No," she said, "but it helps." He leaned against the doorframe. "You ever think about leaving this place?" "I did," she said, working the dough with steady rhythm. "After the fire, but I stayed, not because I was brave, just didn't know where else to go. You know now, I don't need to." August stepped forward. "I could build us something better come spring, a new roof, proper barn, maybe a second room." Norah tilted her head. "You sure you want to stay?" "I don't want to start over again. I'd rather fix what's here." She wiped her hands on a cloth. "You're not just doing this because of Clara, are you?" "No," he said. "I'm here because I want to be." The light from the window edged her face in gold. She nodded once, slow, then turned back to the dough. That night, after supper, she carried Clara to the rocker again, easing down as if the weight of the day had settled deep in her bones. August sat by the fire with a scrap of canvas stretched across his knees, carving notches into the edge with his knife. "You ever think you'd end up here?" Norah asked. He didn't look up. "No, me neither," she said. "I used to think I'd live near water, somewhere green. You still could. I don't want to anymore." He finished the last notch and set the blade aside. "What changed?" "The way you look at me," she said, quiet. He met her eyes and didn't speak. She didn't need him to. Outside, the wind had stilled. The snow had stopped falling. A silence settled over the land, not hollow like before, but full like breath held between heartbeats. Norah rose from the rocker and laid Clara in the cradle August had built from salvaged cedar. She covered the child with a wool blanket, then crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, her hands bare, her eyes steady. "You still don't want easy?" "No," he said. "I want you." She reached for his hand and placed it over her heart. "Then stay." "I already did." They stood like that, the fire casting long shapes across the floor, the baby sleeping, the wind gone still, and the hurt that had once lived between them now replaced by something quieter, deeper earned. By late February, the days stretched a little longer at the edges, though the cold still clung tight. The snow softened and refroze each night, forming a crust that cracked under boots but held the light like glass. August had begun to clear a plot just beyond the cabin where the ground sloped gently toward the creek. He marked it with stones, notched wood posts, and a rough line of string for measuring. Norah stood beside him one morning, Clara pressed against her chest in a wrap stitched from old flour sacks and muslin. "You plan to build a corral?" she asked. "No," August said, setting his foot against the spade. "A garden." She raised her brows. "You know how to grow things." He pushed the blade into the earth. "I know how to try." That night, he brought in a sack of seed potatoes he'd bartered for from a retired scout who lived upriver. Norah inspected them at the table, turning each one like it might reveal a secret. She set 3 aside. "Those sprout crooked," she said. "Don't waste them." August leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You always this particular?" "I carried Clara 9 months and brought her into this world without a soul but you to help. I've earned the right to be particular." He didn't argue. Outside, the wind scraped across the walls, but the fire inside held steady. Norah lifted Clara from the cradle and settled into the rocker, her movements practiced now, quiet but certain. "Your scar," she said, nodding toward his cheek. "What was it?" August's arms dropped to his sides. "Missouri border. A man tried to knife me over a mule I didn't even keep." "You kill him?" "No, left him breathing. Took the mule." She nodded once, then looked down at Clara. The child's eyes fluttered behind her lids, her breath soft and even. "I had a scar once," Norah said. "On my side. From when I fell through the ice crossing Little Pine Creek. Nathaniel pulled me out." "You still have it?" "No, it faded." She paused. "Some marks stay, some don't." August stepped closer. "You think about Nathaniel a lot, not like I did before." She glanced up. "You jealous of a dead man?" "No, but I care what's still living in you." Norah's eyes didn't waver. "Then know this, I miss who he was to me, but I don't want to go back to who I was with him." August reached for her hand where it rested near Clara's feet. His fingers curled around hers. "I don't want to take anything from you," he said. "Only offer what's mine." The lamp burned low, casting their shadows long across the floor. Norah didn't speak again, but she didn't let go. The next morning, she handed him a folded scrap of paper, the edges soft from years of being opened and closed. "Nathaniel wrote this before he died. I want you to read it." August took it, careful not to tear the brittle fold. It was a list short, written in narrow pencil lines. A few names, a supply count, and at the bottom, one sentence in plain script. "If anything happens, Norah gets the land." He looked up. "You never told me." "I didn't know if it still mattered." "It does." She took the paper back, slid it into a small tin with buttons and threads. "I want the land to stay ours, not just mine." August nodded. "Then we'll file it right. Come spring, we'll register it." Norah exhaled. "I want to raise Clara where she can see the sky without fences. But I also want her to know what it means to belong to someone who stays." "She will." That night after supper, Norah brought out a small box from the storage trunk. Inside were 2 pewter spoons, tarnished but whole. She handed one to August. "My mother said a table set for 2 means you expect someone to stay," she said. He turned the spoon in his hand. "Then set it." She did. And when she looked up from the small table, her eyes were steady. The lines of her face softened not from weariness, but from choosing knowing and no longer being alone in it. By the time the snow began to melt in earnest, and the river broke open with ice, the cabin had settled into a rhythm that neither Norah nor August had expected, but both moved through as if it had always been waiting for them. The mornings began with Clara fussing, her cries soft and insistent, and Norah rising to soothe her before the first light reached the windows. August would already be tending the fire or stepping back in from the creek with his boots soaked and a fresh trout caught on a hand line. They rarely spoke first thing. They didn't need to. One afternoon, Norah stood at the edge of the new garden plot, Clara strapped against her chest, while August drove the last of the boundary stakes into the softening ground. The earth still held the memory of frost, but in its scent she could feel the promise of something new. "I want to plant beans," she said, "and onions, maybe squash if the soil takes. We'll need to keep the deer off," August replied, not looking up. "Think you could shoot one if it came close?" "I could," she said, "but I'd rather not." He paused and glanced over his shoulder at her. "You always choose the hard way. I choose the way I can live with." Later, while Clara napped, Norah knelt on the cabin floor with a folded square of linen and a tin of faded thread. August sat beside her with a strip of leather stretched across his knee, shaping it into a harness for the mule he'd traded for with the last of his trapline earnings. "You ever miss the road?" she asked, threading her needle. "I miss the silence of it." "Not the hunger. I miss riding fast," she said. "Sometimes I dream about it, that feeling of the wind pulling everything behind me." "You could still ride," August offered, "when Clara's older." "I will," she said, tying off the thread. "But not to leave." They finished their work without saying more, the quiet between them no longer fragile but full. In early April, a letter arrived by courier from Cheyenne, the paper creased and stained. August unfolded it slowly on the table while Norah cradled Clara in the rocker. "It's from the land office," he said. "They filed the deed, the land's in your name and mine." Norah didn't speak at once. Then softly, "It's ours." He looked over at her. "It was always going to be." Weeks passed. They built a chicken pen behind the cabin. August patched the roof with cedar shingles he cut himself. Norah planted the first row of beans with Clara strapped to her back. Her fingers sunk into the earth like she was telling it a secret. One evening, while the sun lingered low and golden across the field, she found August sitting on the steps, sharpening his knife against a whetstone. She sank down beside him, brushing dust from her skirt. "You know," she said, "I never thought I'd trust another man enough to let him see me in labor, let alone stay. I didn't stay for gratitude." "I know," she said. "You stayed because you wanted to. That's what matters." August set the blade aside and turned toward her. "You still waiting for the other shoe to drop?" "I was," she said, "but not anymore." She reached for his hand, not out of need but certainty. He took it without hesitation. That summer they built the new barn. August raised the beams with help from a neighbor who passed through on his way north. Norah painted the door a deep rust red, the only color she'd allowed herself to choose without compromise. Clara learned to crawl in the grass just outside the porch. Norah watched her one afternoon, arms folded, as August stepped out with a tin pail of water. "She's fast," he said, handing Norah the dipper. "She gets it from me. She'll be strong. She already is." They stood in silence, watching their daughter chase a beetle across the dirt, her hands smeared with soil, her laugh unbothered. That night, after Clara was asleep and the lamps were out, Norah sat on the edge of the bed brushing out her hair. August came to stand behind her, hands settling lightly on her shoulders. "You ever think we'd end up like this?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I'm glad we did." He bent to press a kiss to her neck, slow and deliberate. "I want to marry you." She stilled. He waited. Then she turned to face him, her eyes clear. "I want that too." They married at the end of summer, just as the first crispness returned to the air. No church, no preacher. Just a neighbor to witness and vows spoken under the cottonwood that grew near the creek. Norah wore a dress she'd let down at the hem, and August wore his Sunday shirt with the collar mended. Clara sat in Norah's lap as they signed their names in the old ledger August had brought from town. The ink smudged slightly under Norah's hand. Afterward, they shared a meal on the porch stew, cornbread, and a single jar of preserved peaches. August carved their initials into the porch beam, just above where Norah had hung Clara's first pair of shoes. Years turned, and the land did what land does, it healed. The blackened edges faded, replaced with rows of beans, squash, and wildflowers Norah hadn't planted. The cabin grew with them. A second room added the following spring, and a window cut into the east wall so Norah could watch the sunrise without leaving bed. They never left. They didn't need to. Clara grew tall and sure-footed, riding the mule by the time she was 6. She learned to read from her mother's Bible and to carve from her father's steady hands. At night, she fell asleep to the sound of their quiet laughter, the scrape of August's chair against the floor, the hush of Norah's voice as she banked the fire. They built a life rooted deep in what they'd earned through loss, through silence, through the long rebuilding of trust not requested, but offered. And every morning when August woke first, he reached for Norah's hand before he stood, and every morning she let him.